Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Perhaps the only show that you know of that is done mostly in a vehicular while driving, cruising. That was Nirvana and my crappy radio for you. Little opening music. I mean, not only do you get the high quality of a show produced on the road on 4 rubber wheels, but you also get the staticky radio reception that goes along with it. I mean, what else could anyone ask for? Anyways, today is Taco Tuesday, and just wanted to get on here and blap for a minute. I'm going to share a video that David King produced tomorrow, and it's a unique video because David King is sort of like, he's like Quasimodo. Is it Quasimodo? The Hunchback of Notre Dame? And when I say that, I mean because you never see the guy, you know, like he's the mysterious David King. Like, I remember when I was on Facebook, you didn't really see a lot of pictures of him. Like, if I can remember correctly, he only had like 1 or 2 pictures of himself. So there was this guy that just produced all this amazing, great content, brilliant guy in the Bible, and he just didn't really show himself. He was kind of like the man, the myth, the legend type. And anyways, but this video from David King, he sent it to me and asked if I would share it, is a video about the love your brother passage. And David is full IO, and he shows how this passage ties in with IO nicely. And we can see that anyway, because obviously, you know, the love your brother stuff, you know, it really ties in nicely with Israel only, if you think about it. Like when the New Testament uses the word brethren, it's not using it in a way like we use it, like, hey bro, hey bro, hey bro. It's using it in a really endearing term, like these are fellow Israelites, you know, my brethren. And so, anyways, David does a good job. It's only a short video, and I looked at my schedule, and I actually leave around midday tomorrow, so I will have time to share that, to download it and share it in the morning if all goes well. So look out for that. That'll probably be the last one of the week, I'm sure, and then we'll see what I can bring forth next week. In other news, you guys may know of a man named Adam Marshak. I don't know how to spell or pronounce his name, but Adam is a confused human. He was full preterist. He spoke at many full preterist conferences like Michael Miano, the little portly, bald-headed man that resides in Long Island, New York, who says, "Glory to God, brothers." Michael Miano had Adam speak at his conference a few times, and Adam is kind of like known to have good knowledge on the book of Revelation and everything. But once Adam realized that full preterism shines the light clearly on the truth of Israel only, he sort of took a step back and tap danced, Michael Jackson moonwalked all the way back to futurism. And now who knows what he believes, right? I mean, he's all over the place. But what's funny is people actually send me clips and screenshots. Actually, Michael Barris sent me a few screenshots of this guy's recent rants on Facebook. And like, he's got, a vendetta against IO to try to prove it wrong and everything. And he's one of the only ones that take a stab at it. I mean, there's a few boneheads that do, like Joe Simpson and Wackadoodle Matty Bar Jonah Simon III. These guys are just like totally wackadoodle. Adam is kind of like, you know, he's almost full-blown wackadoodle, and he should be there any minute. But he puts forth these posts, and lately he's been going on, like, quoting Old Testament passages about the nations, right? That's his thing lately. He's like, this proves that we're being saved today. Oh, glory to God. Let's quote an Old Testament passage from the book of Psalms. And, it just shows how delusional and desperate these people are, because Adam is not realizing that anytime he quotes a passage, for instance, like Genesis chapter 12, where it says, in your descendants, or, through your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now, Adam's very knowledgeable when it comes to, like, Greek and Hebrew words and what they actually mean, especially like the words like earth and world and everything. Like, he's a full preterist, right? He understands these things in their limited local context. And yet somehow he forgets that when he quotes things like this. So when he sees the word, the passage in Genesis 12 that, in your seed, hold on, I'll jump over to it. He says to Abraham, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you, okay, a land, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, obviously, Adam knows that there was no concept of globe back then, right? Because Adam obviously argues this when he comes to the New Testament, that there's no concept of globe. So it's funny how he just forgets that and thinks that, thousands of years before the New Testament, somehow they had a concept of globe, right? Because to Adam, this passage here and this word here, earth, means literal globe, okay? But we all know what it means, right? It means land. And the land that was in focus here is the land of Canaan, the physical promised land that God was giving to Abraham and his descendants, okay? And so Adam plays really dumb when it comes to stuff like this. But he goes on and argues that this is a passage literally speaking about literally all families of the literal globe, okay? And if you're a flat earther, all families of the literal flat plane, okay? But it's ridiculous, and it fails on multiple fronts, okay? Because even if this was somehow speaking of something in the New Testament, right, then that scene was fulfilled at the end. And what I mean by that is, at the very end, what do we see happen? What do we see taking place? Well, we see the final picture of the saints in heaven, and guess where they're from? They're from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. Okay, so that final picture of all Israel saved, which included the fullness of the nations, would put a cap and a final nail in the coffin to any argument that that concept goes beyond the coming of the Lord. Because that's when he took them to their promise, and that's the picture of them standing in this supposed heaven around the throne with all these monsters and fairy tale type creatures and 4 living creatures and boogeymans with 4 eyeballs, right? And they're all standing around singing, playing harps, smashing beer bottles over their head, and they're singing praises, right? And that's the 12 tribes of Israel, and they're called out from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. So, in Abraham's seed, that's Israel, many nations were blessed at the end. That's the whole point, all right? So anyways, Adam Marshlock gets the Bonehead of the Month award, and he just doesn't have a leg to stand on, all right? But let's talk about what I wanted to talk about today, and it actually stems around that Genesis 12 promise, right? Because God made a couple promises to Abraham, Abraham back in Genesis. That was one of them. He said that in you, in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So what he's saying is, in you, all the families of the land shall be blessed. In other words, individual families of that land that he was giving to Abraham's seed, they would be blessed. Okay, that's what the immediate context is. Now, I know there's spiritual fulfillments of physical promises kind of going on. We see that a lot with Israel being regathered from the nations in the end, and we know that was kind of taken. The physical reality in the Old Testament was Israel coming back to the second temple and everything in the New Jerusalem there. And we see that kind of like, recapitulated in the New Testament, but in a spiritual sense, they're taken to this New Jerusalem that's not made with hands in the heavens. So there's a lot of that physical in the Old, physical in the Old Testament, spiritual in the New Testament stuff going on, but it still only involves Israel. Okay, that's the key. So anyways, I want to look quickly today at Acts chapter 7, all right? And Acts chapter 7 is chock full of nuts, all right? It's Stephen's addressing and speaking about the call of Abraham. So the high priest says to Stephen, are these things so? And Stephen says, brethren and fathers, listen, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham before he dwelt in Haran and said to him, get out of your country and from your relatives and come to a land that I will show you. Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from there, when his father was dead, he moved him to this land in which you now dwell. All right, now it's interesting because you can see that the land that they are now dwelling in, according to Stephen, was the same land that God moved Abraham to. This was the blessed land, okay? And it says in verse 5, and God gave him no inheritance in it, not even enough to set his foot on. But even when Abraham had no child, God promised to give it to him for a possession and to his descendants after him. All right, so there's Abraham's seed, all right? We have to understand that every time we see the word descendants, it's the same word as seed, okay? They're used synonymously all throughout the Bible. Descendants, seed, seed, descendants, all right? And so here's God saying that he promised to give the land to Abraham and to his descendants after him, or to Abraham's seed, all right? Well, we know who inherited the land later, right? It was Israel. Okay, but let's continue. Verse 6, it says, but God spoke in this way, that his descendants would dwell in a foreign land, and they would bring them into bondage and oppress them 400 years. Well, gee, folks, if it is true that this is speaking of Abraham's seed, and the word descendants is the same as seed, then who is Abraham's seed? Well, according to the New Testament, folks, the New Testament, this is big, all right? This is very big. Because this, again, defines who Abraham's seed is in the days of the New Testament, in the last days. This defines how a Christian Jew, if you will, would have understood who Abraham's seed actually was. Look at what he says. He says, but God spoke in this way that his descendants, whose descendants? Abraham's. So this is Abraham's seed, okay? Would dwell in a foreign land, and that they would bring them into bondage and oppress them 400 years. Well, folks, Stephen just reveals to you in the last days, okay, who Abraham's seed actually was. It was Israel, because we know nobody else was oppressed in bondage for 400 years. That was the Israelites in Egypt. All right, so ding, 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 okay? The little bell should go off in your head, and now you should say, well, wow, Stephen understood that the term Abraham's descendants or Abraham's seed was actually Israel, okay? And then when you get over to Galatians 3, and you can see Paul say that if you are, it doesn't matter if you're Jew or Greek, if you are Christ, then you're Abraham's seed and an heir according to promise. Well, gee, if Stephen understood Abraham's seed to be the Israelites, then what is Paul actually saying there? Well, Paul's saying it doesn't matter if you're Jew or Greek. If you are Christ's, it's because you're an Israelite and you're an heir according to promise. You see how consistency is very important here. We have to let the text and the Old Testament text and the full body of the story define these words. You can't go on and say, oh, suddenly Abraham's seed means someone who makes a conscious decision for Christ. You make a conscious decision for Christ and you become a descendant of Abraham. That's wackadoodle, folks, with a capital W. All right, let's be consistent. Verse 7, and the nation to whom they will be in bondage I will judge. That's Egypt. And after that they shall come out and serve me in this place. Then he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begot Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot 12 patriarchs. Verse 9, and the patriarchs, becoming envious, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him and delivered him out of all his troubles and gave him favor and wisdom in the presence of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor, blah, blah, blah. A famine came over, blah, blah, blah. But when Jacob heard there was grain in Egypt, he sent out our fathers first, and the second time Joseph was made known to the Pharaoh. Then Joseph sent and called his father Jacob and all his relatives to him, 75 people. Okay, let's continue. So Jacob went down to Egypt, and he died, he and our fathers, and they were carried back to Shechem and laid in the tomb that Abraham bought for a sum of money from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. Verse 17, but when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. Hoo-wee! Do you realize what Stephen just says here? Okay, now everybody says they are fulfilling the promise that God made to Abraham today, right? Everyone's like, yeah, man, I made a conscious decision for Christ today in 2020 while I was watching Breaking Bad on Netflix. And yeah, man, I became Abraham's seed, and it's kind of cool, you know? I'm like a descendant of Abraham through faith, man. Like, I don't even get it. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, dude, this is kind of cool. You know what I mean? I'm like the son of Abraham, right? That's what people think. But look at what verse 17 says here. And in the words of Don K. Preston, catch the power of this. Okay? Verse 17. But when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. Well, what does that say? It says very clearly that the promise that God made to Abraham was fulfilled long before this scene in Acts chapter 7, which, according to the story, would have taken place in the 30s AD. So Stephen is looking back long ago at a time when the promise to Abraham was fulfilled. Look at what he says again. But when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. Well, what is that promise? Well, it's the promise that Abraham's seed would inherit the land. The promised land of Canaan. That's what this whole Genesis stuff is about. Okay, that's what it's about. And I shared a Genesis 12 audio a few weeks back. If you haven't listened to it, go check it out. But I talk in depth about how Genesis 12, families of the land, should be interpreted. It's all speaking about Canaan. Okay? But this just goes to show how wackadoodle the Christian viewpoint is. They think that the promise to Abraham is being fulfilled through them today. But the very Bible that they cite actually says that that promise was fulfilled in Israel hundreds of years before the first century. And look at what he says. He says the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. So the time of the promise, that being where the Israelites would inherit that promised land, was drawing near, and the people were growing and multiplying in Egypt. Well, we know that they became such a great multitude, and we know that Moses stood before them in Deuteronomy and said, Israelites, here you are today, like the stars of heaven in number, too great for me to bear, right? So Israel just boomed into a massive number of people, right? A big tribe, okay? And Moses is basically calling remembrance to the promise God made to Abraham that he would multiply his seed like the stars of heaven in number. And he actually uses the same words and says, here you are today, like the stars of heaven in number, too great for me to bear. So folks, there is no fulfillment in anybody today in Abraham's seed. Nobody's growing today in Abraham's seed. There is no body of Abraham's seed that's growing today every time a person puts their faith in Christ. That already took place. That already took place. That was fulfilled in Israel. Which again, folks, shows exactly why we cannot change the meaning of the term Abraham's seed when we want to or when we feel like it. It must remain the same. Okay? It must remain the same. Now, I'm going to cap it there for today, folks, just because I'm getting close to my destination. I trust that there was enough powerful points in here to make you go, ooh-wee, right? And yeah, in other news, we may come back to Acts 7 and finish it off because there's some more very interesting stuff that old Stephen says there that I may want to cover. But Acts 7 is just a doozy. And if you continue reading on, you'll see that he actually starts speaking just like Paul speaks in Romans 1, where he talks about like the Israelites were blinded, their hearts were blinded, they turned to graven images and golden calves, and they rejected their God, so God gave them up to these wicked passions. It's the exact same thing that Paul says in Romans 1, but notice how Stephen's locked in on Israel's history. And some people actually think that Paul is not speaking of the same thing. Give me a break. But one last thing before I let you go here. Rob Shannon, who's a buddy of mine, he's definitely listening to this right now because he loves me. How you doing, Rob? He actually called Wayne Critchfield. You remember Wayne Critchfield, old turtle type? And Wayne Critchfield is a wannabe and a half. He's a funny guy. I mean, I really, even though he was desperately confused and all over the place, I really enjoyed watching his videos for the, satisfaction of the entertainment. He was just very entertaining. Like, he would record himself from about 3 inches from his mouth while he was eating. He's glorifying God with an egg salad sandwich in his mouth, and things are like falling out of his mouth. And, it was kind of disgusting, but at the same time, it's very entertaining, and you can't help but laugh and chuckle. So anyways, Rob Shannon, he's a funny cat, because like, he'll just call random dudes and like talk to them. He's talked to Ward Fenley, the elect Israelite, bonehead. He's called Ward Fenley and basically told him he was a wannabe to his face. But he picks up the phone and he calls these people, and he found Critchfield's number and called him and had a phone call with him last week. And whatever, and just told him how IO is the truth and everything. And he said Critchfield didn't have anything bad to say about IO, and which I thought was kind of interesting. But anyways, I told Shannon, I said, call that guy back and tell him we want him back on YouTube, right? I mean, how strange, right? I want a wannabe to come back on YouTube and make videos, but I really just like the entertainment, like I like funny things to watch. So hopefully Shannon will get in touch with him again and let him know that we're all hoping that he comes back to YouTube and makes more videos, the old turtle type. He was really an interesting fella. He would just break out in singing. He would sneeze. He would eat on camera. He would put up videos and that laugh at it. It was just good times. He kind of reminds me of Jabba the Hutt from Star Wars. But anyways, folks, that's where I'm going to leave it. I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit of random information. And like I said, I probably won't be back the rest of the week, but you should get a video from Quasimodo himself, Mr. David King, the man, the myth, the legend, the IO master, the IO Jedi. And David should be on my channel tomorrow if all things go well. Anyways, folks, I hope you all have a great day. Don't forget to give this video a like, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.